All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Gary. He's on PTO. He's on his bajillionth wedding anniversary. I think it's 30 some odd years. So congratulations uh, to you, Gary, and your lovely wife. And at the same time, he didn't prep Jack and I enough with what number webinar are we on? So Jack may know, I don't know, but it's a lot. So as always, we're trying to keep it fresh. We thought, going with the theme of recession, student loan executive order that just got passed, depending on which part of the aisle you're on, this is either great or it's evil, so we thought maybe it's juxtaposition. Jack's in the briefing room, you'll see him in a second, but I thought, why not just show up on a first order ship, given all the rhetoric that's out there. So anyway, you guys know the drill. Thanks for coming on. If you've got a question, make sure that you post it in the Q&A chat disabled. Good question. That would imply that I know how to get the chat going. Maybe you can try it now, Joe. I think I got it. I mean, I just hit it, so I don't know how to actually get it going. Gary's smarter at that than I am. So we may not have the chat. Maybe it's all just going to be QA today, but you guys go ahead and test it and see what happens. Anyway, the couple things that I wanted to touch on this week on the Inflation Reduction Act and the Student Loan Executive Order. I think what Jack and I talking about with the Inflation Reduction Act is not necessarily hit on the act itself or the tax ramifications of it yet, but rather, hey, what are we hearing out there in terms of what are we hearing from our clients? Because that's really kind of, I think, the most relevant. So we'll share some of that. But on the student loan forgiveness, which, we're really going to hit on first, regardless of how you feel about whether this is a good idea or not, what I did want to make sure that I hit on from a tax perspective, because I already started getting questions about it, is that, a common question that we always get asked, when your kid's about to go off to college, because you got to fill out the FAFSA application, the financial aid application. And you're like, well, maybe I shouldn't claim my kid as a dependent. Maybe that'll help them get more financial aid. And the fact is, for a lot of our clients, claiming a dependent doesn't really provide much of a tax advantage, because the money that you're getting has been roughly phased out based on your income level. So in theory, it sounds like, well, that's a good idea if it's neutral. The problem is the government caught wind of that a long time ago. So dependent status from an IRS perspective is completely decoupled from dependent status when you're checking the box on the FAFSA application. So while I don't condone lying, you could still lie, I suppose, on the FAFSA application. But for the purposes of government aid, when it comes to higher education and whether you were dependent or not, it's a pretty set of tests, which are not tax filing status. It's really more like, I'm an orphan or a ward of the state. I'm legally emancipated from my parents, or I have a legal guardian that is not my parents. So basically estrangement, from your parents. I'm over 24. I'm under 24, but you know what? I got an early start on that family. So I got kids of my own, so that I'm providing support for, not I have kids of my own, but they're really living with my parents. And they're providing all the support. So as I said, they caught wind of that a while ago. So my point in saying that is that, Jack will hit on kind of the summaries of the fact sheet, but if everybody was like, oh, that's going to be great, this is going to be perfect, I'm going to let my kid file on their own because they only made $10,000 last year at McDonald's, not going to work for you, we believe, in this instance. So don't get, all excited yet. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Jack for the White House briefing room.
All right, so welcome to Shumaker News directly from the White House briefing room. So what I want to do is it's just easier to kind of maybe go to the actual White House fact sheet that was put out yesterday, and they have some interesting graphs. I'm going to see if I can share this screen with everyone. Okay, so there's a lot of text in here, but what you'll see is this is the justification, or obviously the White House slant to it, and I will give you essentially the Republican rebuke of it next. But if you look, this is what they are saying, and I have no independent verification of these facts. I just pulled them up, and this is what is being. I mean, they're always, the charts have where they're sourced from. So this is from the College Board and from the U.S. Department of Education, but they're saying that cost of attending college has skyrocketed, but the federal support of that subsidization when needed has not. So they're basically saying that they're catching up with what they should be doing as far as subsidizing education on a federal level with your tax dollars, and then they show attendance and maximum Pell Grants on the X and Y axis. And they talk, okay, these are all the things that are going to happen. And then they show another graphic about Pell Grant recipients coming from families with $60,000 or less. And they break it down into subcategories. So they're showing that, the percentage within that percentage when they say nearly all. So what is that? 80, 94. Okay, so maybe that does cover 100%. Numbers do not add to 100 due to rounding. Okay, there you go. Always a disclaimer. All right, 90% of debt cancellation benefits will go to borrowers earning less than $75,000. Okay, and here's the graphical proof of that. Again, no independent verification of that. And then they talk about, and they give you some examples as to how it's going to impact examples of portions of society or types of workers. So they talk about construction worker, public school teacher, a nurse with a bachelor's degree, and what the annual savings are and what that means as far as payments go. So, and this is, it's a finite amount that's being forgiven, so it lowers, and this is the impact of having a loan balance that's greater than the amount that's forgiven. So that's that. Now you go to what is titled Student Loan Socialism. And I will tell you that I've talked to more people over the past couple of days that are not happy with this for several reasons. And the core reasons are, well, wait a minute, why are we spending government money and giving it to private individuals in this fashion? But if you kind of ask them, what do you mean by that? They're saying two things as I see it, which is that I worked my ass off to pay off my student loan, and it's not fair that someone else can just go to school for free. Or older people that I've talked to have said, well, I've worked hard so that my kids can go to school and not have this debt, or not have as much of a debt. And so and this was, I think, quoted a couple times in different places last night, where it was a former Obama advisor that criticized this, and the criticism is slap in the face to every family who sacrificed to save for college, every graduate paid the debt. So basically what I just said, astonishingly unfair. And as you would expect, it was Mitch McConnell who said that on behalf of the Republican side of things. And then the comparison to the Inflation Reduction Act, which is, okay, supposedly we've just reduced inflation by doing certain things and moving some shells around, kind of thing. But then you just basically just blew that up by giving out more money to individuals. And then the fact that this doesn't really, it's kind of like medicine that's dealing with the symptoms, but not the underlying cause. And so when you have higher education costs increasing, it says graduate schools, but at all levels, undergraduate, et cetera, then you have those issues. So, and then there's other facts related to that to justify that side of it. So what we're seeing is, as expected, that the reaction that, hey, this is a great thing, and then it's like, yeah, no, you basically bamboozled the American public in this program. So that's a quick summary. You can find this stuff on the internet. I don't know if Shumaker is going to do a summary of this or not, probably. And if that happens, I'll be sure to send that out. And I will put, just as a side note, as we go into talking more about the actual Reduction Act, Shumaker did put together a summary of that, and I'll put that in the chat, or maybe if it's in the Q&A, we'll get it to you somehow once we figure it out, the technology, with Gary not being around. So there you go.
All right. Well, thank you, Jack. I appreciate it. I mean, I kind of, again, my own personal feelings on this are that, I don't know. I'm sort of indifferent on it, in the sense of like, that is an understandable critique, that we are raising interest rates to encourage less spending out there, so people will hang on to their money more, but then we're giving them money. At the same time, as someone who's currently writing a check for 2 kids, about to write a check for a 3rd, yeah, college tuition sucks from a price point perspective. What I will say though is that there's a YouTube video that I did a while back, shamelessly self-promoting, on healthcare spending and college education. It's like, look, at the end of the day, in terms of like relative numbers, college tuition is pretty damn expensive relative to what I paid. And at the same time, I was paying those dollars in 1991. So like, I'll bet if I kind of played that out at like a standard growth rate, it's probably, I get it, real wages haven't risen at the same level, but it probably, those costs have risen. Actually, the fact is, college education costs have risen at the same rate that the GDP has risen. So they've been in lockstep, whereas healthcare costs have massively outpaced GDP growth. So it's a hard one. I kind of see both points here if I was going to politically commentate, and then I'm going to not politically commentate. So I'm going to get to a couple questions before hopping into inflation. The first one was from Robert, and I appreciate the question, Robert. It's a question we get asked a lot, and I apologize for not addressing your email. I would love to say it's because I wanted to wait until the webinar to do it, but the reality is I just forgot. So the question is, are cash rewards from credit cards tax-free? The answer to that is, with all things, it depends. So let's talk about the taxable components for a minute. The thing, first off, if you get a 1099 from the credit card company, it's that they, in their determination, based on their own legal analysis, believed that you received taxable income. So if you received a 1099, that's going to be a bad fact for you. And chances are whatever they issued you a 1099 for is probably going to be taxable. However, they rarely issue 1099s. So what are cases where they would issue 1099s? The most common occurrence of issuing a 1099 is when you get a cash reward for a sign up, or for annual use, or for annually having the card, that's in excess of $600 and is not dependent upon anything other than you just breathing. So like, hey, Jack, sign up for the Capital One card and we'll give you $1,000. Don't have to spend $1. We'll just give you $1,000. That is going to be considered taxable income. On the other hand, if Jack uses the crap out of his cards, earns bajillions of points, and otherwise uses those points to buy flights, as an example, the IRS's position on that is that all that really represents is a discount on the purchase of the flight. Therefore, it is not considered taxable income. It's just instead of Jack having to pay $1,000 for a flight, he had to pay $25. You go, Jack. You just got a discount. If you get bajillions of points, and so that applies not only to flights, but like any merchandise purchase that you make. If you get bajillions of points and you generate a cash reward that you then use to pay the bill, the IRS would say, well, the cash reward isn't taxable income, but theoretically, you're supposed to then offset your expenses by the amount of the cash reward that you use. Because I mean, at the end of the day, you got to have some debits and credits that float around there. So what are you debiting? What you're debiting is the reduction of the Amex bill. The credit, because it's now paid, the credit has to sit somewhere. And the credit side of the transaction is supposed to be an offset against the expenses that you would have otherwise incurred. So even though it's not income, like I'm not claiming it as income, it's that I'm not getting the benefit of deducting the full freight of the expenses. So it's a disguised way of saying, well, it really is income when I use it as a cash reward. So to that point, yeah, Robert, you could post it as other income, or you could just post it as an offset to expenses. It's really up to you in terms of what's going to give you the best accounting information. From a tax standpoint, it's the same no matter what. And then Joe asked a question, in a classic Joe type question: can I take out a loan today for student expenses incurred 20 years ago and ask for loan forgiveness? They haven't gotten into the details of the loan program yet, but considering that it's either tied to people that otherwise would have received a Pell Grant, or otherwise are at a certain income level, I think Jack and I's suspicion is this is going to be for people who are currently paying for college, that we're not going to be able to go retroactively. But it is an interesting question, and kind of gets back to the whole fairness doctrine in terms of, well, what are we doing for people that already paid for college? So it's like one of those, I don't know, how could you ever solve, for that when you implement a benefit for somebody? So the answer is, you can try,
you're right.
probably not.
Yeah, I don't think you can refinance your debt. Is
Yeah.
essentially what you're asking. And I thought about that too. I'm like, oh, wait a minute, my kids are in college. I should go borrow some more money. But yeah, too late. It has to be, I think the cutoff date was July 1st of this year that the loans had to be in existence.
Yeah. So on the recession, so I've been asking and have been getting asked, hey, what are we seeing out there? What are we seeing? We see in any kind of scale back. We see in anything that's out there in terms of recession. And, while I still believe in everything that I've said in terms of preparing your company in the event that something happens, because basically everybody's saying that it's going to happen, we have not had our client base experience it yet, even from people that I thought would have. Like a grading company that the large portion of the business is in residential home grading. I would have thought, wow, they probably already getting people tell you we're scaling stuff back. It's like, so far, not so much. So if anybody's on the webinar that actually has started seeing stuff, please hit us up in the chat, in the chat or in the Q&A. But so far, knock on wood, in the BGW client base, we really haven't seen, with one exception, we really haven't seen anybody that's had any kind of downturn yet. The only exception that we've had is that we do have one client that is in really high-end staffing, like, high quality CEO, CFO, COO type placements at predominantly larger companies. So what they're seeing is a slowdown of people trying to fill those positions. And I think that kind of mirrors what you're seeing in terms of, Facebook announcing we're going to hire less engineers, people starting to prepare for, not hiring as many people as they planned. which is really just saying we're not going to hire as many open positions as we thought we were, because we're forecasting less growth than we thought that we were originally going to have. So, that's probably the only fact that we've seen so far is, a company that is in staffing is starting to see a little bit of slowdown. I think we just got a post in the chat that said one of our clients that sells new and used heavy construction equipment is starting to see a little bit of a slowdown in new and used sales, which kind of makes sense because, same clients that are in construction are starting to go more towards a lease arrangement so that they can put the equipment back if anything slows down instead of having to be on the hook for buying it. So that's right. It would be, I could see a scenario where people are starting to spend less, on stuff. So, Jack, what say you?
So Robert asked a question about, and I don't know if he answered it about booking it as a credit to other income. Did you see that?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. I thought that, okay.
I said it was his choice, either reduce the
choice.
expense or
Okay.
book it as other income.
Sorry. All right. What I'm seeing with clients is a lot of uncertainty on how this is going to impact their businesses. I mean, I think we said last week and in prior weeks that as this was being developed, that is it really going to impact most of us with respect to all these things. Similarly, it's, well, as gas prices are reduced, that puts more money in our pocket potentially and diverts those funds to other things. So now we're spending more again. So it's one of those things where it just kind of goes back and forth. It's, there are consequences to everything, as we'll see with the forgiveness that is intended to come through and how that's going to impact all of us. But this morning, as I was listening to Good Morning America in the background, one of the things is that going to change our behavior, meaning those that are within the zone of forgiveness or waiving the amounts, is that going to cause them to maybe make different choices? Because of the fact that you can't go and do it now, maybe not, but is there something else that's coming on the heels of that is going to impact more students and more parents that are funding college education? So it's been great. It's just one thing after another. It seems like it's okay. Where are we going to spend our money? Where are they going to spend our money, kind of thing. It last night, and I don't know if I'm able to somehow share. I don't know. I don't see a way to do this, but just so you know that on our website, if you go to the main page, the article is called "One Big Thing: Largest Climate Investment in U.S. History." And the two authors of that are not Shumaker law employees. They are with Shumaker Advisors, which is they're lobbyists essentially for our larger clients. They don't like to be called lobbyists because basically they are educators and influencers to try to get to a certain result. And but I had asked them the questions about, okay, what is really going on? And these two individuals that I had dinner with last night, they basically can walk into the Capitol building and meet with anyone they want to within reason. I mean, they have to make a point, but they know all the staff of everybody in the Capitol building. And so, they were talking about that, one of them was speaking to Mr. Schumer the other day about something. And so their perspective. Oh, and what was interesting is Shumaker Advisors is bipartisan, meaning it's not one way or another. And so I had interesting conversation about hearing both sides of things. It was like, well, I kind of respectfully disagree with that. It was one of those very cordial, and then after a bottle of wine or so, and then it was kind of like, okay, yeah, that's BS, let me tell you why, kind of thing. So it was a very interesting conversation. But so it's even amongst them, there's a lot of unknowns. And they reiterated the fact that this stuff gets written by staff members. You don't have members of Congress putting pen to paper or start typing stuff out. It's the staff members that are writing all this stuff and then collaborating and trying to get it to something that gets pushed out to the members of Congress in order to be considered. So it was the first comment was when they were explaining to us. So they came to Charlotte to explain to people in my office that are not familiar with advisors what they do. And so, for example, a client who is in the business of energy, they manufacture solar panels. There are things out there that may impact legislation, regulations that may impact them, and they should know about it, and they maybe want to lobby one way or another. So, but the first comment out is like, one of the things we do is we make sure people understand that Schoolhouse Rock is not accurate. And I'm like, okay, yes, we kind of all knew that, but, and then of course, for the next 10 minutes, you're singing Schoolhouse Rock. And I don't know if I actually heard what they had to say for the next 10 minutes, but, so all those things going on. So that's a long-winded way of saying we're back to a lot of confusion at the level of we were when PPP came out and then forgiveness came out, kind of thing. Because it doesn't involve a lot of consumer and business owner activity, you're not going to see a whole lot of memorandum and stuff coming out as interpretation of these things, like we did with PPP and the FAQs that were coming out. We're not going to see things like that on this necessarily anytime soon. So on either thing, the debt forgiveness or on the Reduction Act.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jack. Joe had a chat around the labor shortage still exists, and you would think that would ease if we're truly in an inflationary period. I hear you. And I think the other side of that equation, though, is just there's less people in the workforce, so I think that's the problem that we've seen is that, population demographics have kind of moved a little bit at the same time that unemployment is historically low, meaning like, we're at the lowest unemployment rate I think we've had ever at this point in time. So even if, so you go back to the Facebook engineering equation, hey, we want to hire all these engineers, they may not even be available to hire just because of the population demographics being lower. So I think it would take a lot to kind of move the needle on getting us back to the point. I guess optimistically, my hope is that, maybe it'll slow down the rate of the wage inflation that's been happening. But in terms of all of a sudden, tomorrow there's going to be a big labor surplus. I don't know. I'm could be biased by the industry that I'm in, but I'm concerned that will not actually prove to be true from the stuff that I've been seeing.
Yeah, and an interesting title of an article I read recently, which is kind of knew what the content was, but it was the demand of the supply chain, meaning labor supply chain and labor supply, as to what and we've talked about this. Okay, how do you get people back in the office? And we're seeing epic successes and we're seeing epic failures as to, and in some cases it's the same formula. It just depends on the industry, it depends on the workplace, it depends on the culture of the workplace as well. So if there's a lot of collaboration that needs to happen, and the collaboration needs to be interpersonal, meaning live, in order to get, versus it being on a screen. So, one of the things that is talked about is, while it may be efficient to be on a screen so that we all don't have to drive to a central location, park our cars, get in an elevator, do all those things just to get to the office, at the same time, in the same instance, a live meeting versus a video meeting, in the live meeting, you're not multitasking. your attention is really not necessarily drawn away as much as being in front of a screen and saying, okay, I'm going to put it on mute, or, and go deal with something else, or have other distractions like animals or things like that. But then there are others that prefer to be working from home, and the employers and the businesses are okay with that because they are as efficient. I have mixed feelings about that because I think it works both ways, but depending on what circumstances and who it is. I mean, obviously, if I have a client that's coming to sign documents that need to be notarized, I need my notary to be in the office, and we can't do that remotely. The flip side of that is that we don't notarize documents as much as we used to. We now go to what a lot of times, and if you've experienced having to deal with notaries, whether like buying a house or something like that, the true reason for a notary is to validate the signature and the person signing as being authentic by someone who has pledged an oath to say, I'm going to do certain things. I'm going to look at that driver's license. I'm going to look at that picture and make sure they match. And if there are any problems, I will not sign the notary. If everything's great, I will sign the notary and move on. Versus someone saying, okay, I witnessed the actual signature of this person onto that piece of paper. So, for example, in some instances in estate planning documents, you have witness lines that are not necessarily notary lines. But ironically, you have a notary that is notarizing the person's signature and the two witness signatures. So that notary has checked 3 IDs essentially. But my point is that technology has allowed us to go to a certain place that in some cases is detrimental to the businesses and the culture itself. And I think that we've talked about this a lot. Culture means a lot. And give you another example. In considering whether we should continue our summer associate program, it is, well, okay, do we really need the help? Are we really just, is it more of a community service kind of thing, helping some law school students getting acclimated to see if they want to be transactional, if they see they want to be litigation people, or I see it now as bringing someone in to see what our culture is about, and then deciding whether or not it fits with them. Or if they want to make, be candid, more money in a New York law firm, but not having any free time on weekends and nights, and just being basically locked into their job for the first 5 years of their career, maybe even considering not starting a family in that period of time. So all those things are going on, but and this a long-winded way of saying that I think a lot of it is the uncertainty. If you can create certainty in the culture, then that seems to be a way to longevity of employees staying with you and not jumping because of the supply chain of people and the unemployment rate and everything else. But the employees can demand a lot more than they did previously, dollar wise, vacation wise, hybrid working from home or working from the office, and we all have to just deal with that.
Thanks, Jack. Bruce has a question around California's ban on electric vehicles, and whether or not we should be all going long on minerals. That it's not my area of expertise, so don't go buy anything based on this advice. We need to have Ben here to answer that question, or somebody more competent than myself to answer that question. I'm just going to give my opinion that, I mean, it kind of, the timing dovetails, I think, interestingly, with when most of the major automotive manufacturers had already said they were going to ban, or they were going to get off internal combustion engines anyway. So I feel like the EV ship has sailed, mostly because if you can't retool that fast. so I think if GM and Ford, are all saying we're going to be out of the internal combustion business, I want to say it was by 2030, from what I recall, then they're not, that you can't put that genie back in the bottle, just based on how long it takes to ramp up and ramp down manufacturing. So to that standpoint, I think that, values would at least stay constant or potentially go up unless there's cheaper ways to extract. And I think at some point, my own personal opinion is that they'll change the way they do batteries to where they're not dependent upon natural resources and, have the potential to be so combustible and toxic, but that's just my 2 cents. All right.
What's interesting too is I'm seeing more in around Charlotte and uptown charging stations for vehicles. I'm not familiar with how that works. Is it like you put your credit card in and you just park your car there for a while you're, while it's not moving? And seems like what I think is interesting is they make it look like a gas pump. It's like I think before seeing that would have expected like an outdoor electrical cable that you just kind of plug in, 3-prong kind of thing. But so it seems like that there is more acceptance of that. I see a lot of the newer construction, multifamily, so apartments, condos that have in the parking lots and parking spaces are designed for more electric vehicles. So I think that there is an acceptance that is in the direction that we're going in, versus maybe in prior years resistance. Like there's just no way to do that. One of the things that was discussed yesterday, one of our clients is in the power generation business, and it's okay, well, we're building all these things that are going to run on electricity, but they have to be charged somewhere. And some of these electric grids are at their maximum capacity. So not only are you asking to add capacity to light up the apartment complex, now you're increasing the demand because you're building parking spots that have to also run electricity and pull from somewhere. So there has to be a lot of infrastructure changing. And as Adam said, you can't just wave a wand over it and make it happen. And then there's also the underlying discussion as to, okay, what's going to generate this electricity? Don't we need to use traditional methods of generating electricity in addition to wind, solar, and everything else, because there's just going to be a higher demand. So the counter argument to that is, yes, but it's organized chaos, which is that we can control the amount of emissions, and it's emissions from a certain place and not emissions that are being pushed out on our highways and everywhere else. So again, 3 sides to everything, right? So we'll see how that shakes out.
All right. Well, does anybody have any questions out there that they want to hit us up with? We don't need to keep you until noon. If you don't have any questions, we'll let everybody enjoy an early lunch. But if you got questions, that's what we're here for.
Silent and bashful crowd.
That's all right.
We answered all of their questions in 40 minutes.
Well done. Well done. So anywho, does anybody, going once, going twice, sold? But Jack, any kind of closing comments before we call it?
I think it'll just be interesting to see what happens. Some of the questions last night with these 2 politically oriented people was, okay, what are your thoughts on what's going on with elections and contested battles, and asking about the whole having classified documents, all those things that are kind of in the news. And but it's just, how is all this going to shake out in a few weeks, essentially a few months, but a few weeks, and what is going to flip? And it's you know, part of the influence in making that happen is social media and all these things that we didn't have years ago, that influence, that you hear something and then you hear it from somewhere else and then it becomes fact sooner than it would have otherwise. And so, you know, I would suggest that when thinking and hearing things, that you validate it if it's going to cause you to make a decision one way or another in anything. It's just, I think that a lot of us, including myself, are, we have certain reactions to things, initial reactions to things, and then it's like, okay, yeah, is that really true or not? And you become kind of skeptical. So my parting thought of the day is just make sure you validate and corroborate what you hear, because we're getting hit with a lot of different things from different sources that just didn't exist, you know, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, now, and are purposely manipulated. And if you believe the conspiracy theories manipulated by China and Russia and others that, you know, are infiltrated into our American social media. So.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. And I appreciate everybody's time for sticking with us this far. We'll be back again next week. If you got any ideas of what you'd want us to talk about, you know, hit us up and let us know. So thank you as always, Jack from the White House.
Of course. I'll be back home in a little while. I'll be back in next week. So it's all good.
See you guys.
Thanks. Bye.
All right.